Hey everybody, in this video I'm going to walk you through getting started with the isometric drawing assignment. Now, this is the assignment that if you slide down here you get to take a look at these objects. These objects come from an AutoCAD text that I had years and years ago. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to set these up and how to draw these using AutoCAD. Now, slide back up here and reading these directions. It says the objects below are drawn on an isometric grid. Each dot is spaced ½ inch from the next dot when measured on the isometric axes. So we got to understand, well, what are the isometric axes? Now, then you're being asked to draw, or using AutoCAD, redraw the 7 isometric objects. Okay, gets laid out on a title block. Plot the drawings, and then using the red line overlay, check your drawings for accuracy and make changes as necessary. Now, this is something that we'll be working through how to do this in the classroom, but then also how to handle this remotely. So we'll have to address that as well. And then after you check these for accuracy, you'll reprint them and submit them for grading. All right. Scale on your plot is 1:2. So let's go back up here first. Let's talk about how to set this up. Each dot spaced ½ inch from the next dot. And what does that mean? So what I've done is I've gone ahead and downloaded this into an Adobe PDF so that I can actually draw on this. If you want to be able to do that too, you can to download the assignment, and then you can actually zoom in on it so you can see it a little bit better. So I'm zooming in on this first object here, and I'm going to then go ahead and start talking about how do we start reading this drawing. So I'm going to grab my comment tool here so I can draw on this and you can see what we're doing. But when it says each dot is ½ inch away from each other, what they're talking about is along the isometric axes. So this is an isometric axis. As I draw back here, that is an isometric axis. Okay. There is another isometric axis that's going to be right here. So this is an isometric axis, all right, and so forth and so on. Another isometric axis is then the vertical axis. So you can see that these things line up on the isometric axes. Okay, so think about the isoplane right, isoplane left, and isoplane top. Now, that being said, you can only then measure along these axis planes, and that's what I've talked with you guys about before, is how to do that and how you can only draw on those planes. Well, if I were to go ahead and say use my drawing tool, the distance from this point to this point then is obviously a ½ inch. Okay, so that is a ½ inch. So we would draw this ½ inch line back on the isometric axis, and then we would start going up. And we start counting, so we have 1 point, that's 2 points, that's a ½ inch. Then we have, of course, there's a 1 inch, an 1.5 inches, and then 2 inches. So then the line that was going to then go up vertically from here, whoops, grab the right tool here. The line that would go up vertically from here is going to be 2 inches long, okay, because it's a ½ inch, that's 1 inch, and so forth, all right? So you're going to then continue to draw on these isometric axes. That would be a 2 inch, and then, of course, a ½ inch line. Once you go ahead and you sketch out the entire box, all right, then you're going to look at this iso circle. Now, the iso circle will be drawn just like information given on the object in the video above on how to make iso circles. But you're going to use AutoCAD to create the iso circle. This object is right in the middle of the part because you can look at these dots and you can see how the dots line up, and that this center dot of the object is here, and that's also the center dot of this iso circle or this ellipse. So you go ahead and set that in the proper location, and then you also look at, well, how big is it? Well, from the center out to an edge along an axis, okay, or from the center out to an edge along an axis, all right, that is a ½ inch. So you can see that this circle has a radius of a ½ inch or a diameter of 1 inch. Okay, so that being said, you can now see how big to make this. All right, so that all being set up, then how do you get this to show depth? Well, you're going to then take this circle and you're going to grab the circle and copy it, and you'll copy it from center back along the isometric axis, the distance of the part. Well, how thick is the part? Well, we already said that the part from here to here is a ½ inch. So you will copy it back a ½ inch. Now, once you do that, you're going to then have this arc showing up here. You just trim it off. So you trim that part off, and then you have your object. Okay? So I'm going to jump into AutoCAD here, and we'll just walk through how to do one of these very quickly. All right, so back in AutoCAD, I'm going to go ahead and first pull down my layers. Got to grab the right layer, the Object Viz, grab my line tool. And again, we said the first line I'm going to draw is going to go back on the 30-degree axis, and that's going to be a 1/2 inch. There's my 0.5. Come up 2, come back forward a 1/2, 0.5, and then come down 2. Now I'm going to just zoom in here a little bit more. And now I'm going to come back on the opposite angle of that 30, which is a 150. All right, and you know, I don't remember how big that part was. Let's go look. So from here, we're going to go back across here. So this is going to be from here. That's a 1/2. That's 1 inch. That's 1.5 inches, so 2 inches. So the part is 2 inches long. All right, so back here to AutoCAD, and we'll come out on the axis, and we'll type in 2 inches. Come up. We know that's 2 inches. And then this is the beauty of isometric drawing. If I did this correct, this will come back on the angle. There's my 30. There's my 2 inches, and I can just click, and I know I did it correctly. So let's go ahead and get the rest of that ISO top taken care of. This is going to be 1 inch or 1/2 inch, and then we come forward 2 inches. Again, if it's right, you get to see it. Now, I'm going to just create a line from corner to corner. That way I can use the midpoint for my ISO circle. My ISO circle cursor is active. Okay, if not, your cursor would look like this. You're not going to have the ISO circle option when you go up here to your axis end. There's no ISO circle option. So what do? Well, you got to get that turned on. So you got to get that cursor turned on down here. So you have your isometric cursor. If for some reason this disappears, you don't see it down here, you can access it by these 3 little lines over here, and then go find your isometric drafting tool right there. Isometric drafting will turn that back on. Okay. So with that set, we pull down our ellipses. We hit axis end. Now we have the option for ISO circle. We click on ISO circle, and now it says ellipse specify center. Well, let's just go ahead, and I'm going to just click and pull and say, wow, that doesn't look right. So I'm going to hit F5. Say, yup, that's the correct plane, and this is the ISO left plane. And it's actually asking me to specify radius. Well, when we were talking about radius is going from the center to the outside edge. That's going to be a 1/2 inch along that axis. So we go back in here and jump into CAD, and then I'm going to go ahead and type in 0.5 and hit enter. Then I'll just take and grab it, and I'm just going to use my center point here, take it to my midpoint here, click. Now I'm going to go ahead and give it depth. So I grab the part again, grab the copy tool, mouse over the edge to get the center point, and now I'm going to come back on the isometric axis, but I'm going to go way back on the 30, and I'll type in 0.5 and hit enter, and now you can see how far back this object goes. Okay, remember, it's the thickness of the part. We are creating the illusion that this is a part. So I don't need this line anymore. I can grab my trim tool, and I can go ahead and trim this off. So you can see this looks like a 2x2 by 1/2 inch block with a hole in it. So that takes care of the first object. All right, so I'm going to jump back into this assignment because I want to talk about a few other objects here and how to get these built up. And what I really want to discuss is the grid here a little bit. And I'm going to then show you when I start drawing on this grid what you need to be aware of. And specifically, some of these objects don't end their lines on points. Okay, so here, if you're looking at this object where my cursor is, this one right here, all right, this one's a little tricky. What you're doing is you need to do some estimates. So if you're going to then say, let me get out of that tool, delete this. If you're going to go ahead and say that the distance from this dot to this dot is a 1/2 inch, okay, so let's just go ahead and make that assumption, which we know is correct. Then what would the distance be from this dot to halfway between the 2 dots? Okay, what would this distance be? Well, what's half of a 1/2 inch? Well, that's a quarter, okay, or equals 0.25. Okay, so we know that if it doesn't go the whole way, it's half. So if you look right here at this drawing, you can see that this dot right here, all right, there's a dot, that's a full distance, that's a 1/2 inch. But here's another dot. This goes to here and stops right there. So the distance here is going to be 0.25, okay? So then this entire line is going to be 1/2 inch plus a 1/2 inch plus 0.25. So it's a 1/2 and a 1/2 is 1 plus 0.25, then this is going to be 1.25. So this is how this drawing gets read. So this entire line is going to be 1.25. You have to look at this carefully. If we are looking at, say, we'll scroll down here a little bit. We're looking at these dots, and we're going to say that this dot is in the half point. What about if it only goes this far? Okay, so if it only goes this far, well, what's half of 0.25? Then we're going to take and say that it's 1.25. That's half of 0.25. So here, this portion of the drawing right here, all right, this section here doesn't go halfway. Okay, it does not go halfway. It only goes a little bit. So because if I look at this dot from this dot to this dot, halfway would be here. So we're only going half of a half. So this is that 0.125. So the entire length of this line. So we have one dot, we have two dots, so that's an inch, and then it's going to be 1.125. That's the length of this line. So you get to see you have to be very careful about reading this drawing and identifying where things go. Okay, jumping over here to this one, we'll talk about this quickly. This top arc is nothing more, and this is the top arc I'm going to draw on here right now. This top arc is nothing more than an isometric ellipse that has been trimmed. Okay, so it has been trimmed and then copied back, and you can easily make these objects. Always start at this front corner point. If you start at the front corner point on any one of these objects, okay, start from what you know and build out. Okay, always look for center points off of the object. Okay, this arc at this point here, this arc is an isocircle, and that's coming off of what would be the center point for this bottom arc down here. So this bottom arc is an isocircle that has been trimmed, okay? And you got to look to see, well, where's center on this part? So we probably need to draw some additional geometry and use our center points, okay? So this particular object here is also a little challenging. You can only draw lines on length that are on the isometric axis. So this line from here to here is going to be 1 inch. This line from here to here is going to be, let's see, that's 1 inch, that's 2 inches, this is going to be 2.5 inches. So this line is 2.5 inches. You cannot get a length from here to here. All you can do is connect the dots after you draw the two lines. So knowing that, any line that is drawn that does not follow the isometric axes, and you can see I'm drawing on these axes right now. If it does not follow these axes, you cannot draw it to a length. You can only connect the dots after you've drawn other lines that you can draw to length. So when you draw these lines, then you come back and you connect the dots from here to here. Okay? You can then create geometry for points. Go ahead and use your copy tool and copy from here to here and then trim what you don't need. All right? This is where you're definitely going to need to be thinking through these drawings. They can be a little complex. They can be a little challenging, but I want you to be able to think through utilizing all the CAD tools that you've been given and then function through this drawing carefully. If you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out and see how we can work our way through. So I hope this helps get you started with the isometric drawings.